design. The optimal life with Elliot Barnett. Shine, be an agent of change. The future is alive.
Welcome to the Optimal Life podcast. My name is Elliot Barnett, and I'm excited for you to be here with me today to learn to help others or help yourself live an optimal life. In today's episode, we're going to talk about one of the most important pieces of the mental health puzzle. It is language. It's important to cognitive response therapy. It's important to the effectiveness of mental health, and it's very important to you personally. You might not know or realize why yet, but by the end of this episode, you absolutely will. So that's the journey we're going to take together today to understand the power of language. Of course, you probably intuitively understand how powerful and impactful language is. There's somewhere around 200,000 actively used words in the English language alone. I mean, that's a lot. So clearly, and if you think back, clearly language is the most influential and powerful inventions that humans have ever come up with. It has allowed us to evolve into societies and civilizations, form governments, have relationships beyond a lot of other animal species. We have this incredible way of evoking emotions. Language can inspire, traumatize, anger, frustrate. It can evoke such powerful emotions of fear, of excitement. There is very few things that you can think of. I can't think of any that is a human invention that has this type of power. So clearly, it must have a role to play in our mental health. How could it not? But when I started to question the effectiveness of mental health approaches, mental health typically focuses on behaviors, habits, motivations, traumas, all sorts of different things, but it doesn't really focus on or think to the tool, what is really behind all of this, which is language. And what you realize is that language is not just a tool for communication, but it's actually a cognitive technology. It's something that really shapes our identities. It really articulates our self-perceptions. It's sort of almost, it reinforces behavioral patterns, what we say out loud, what we hear around us. It is not just the thoughts that show up from our unconscious. And we've talked a little bit about that previously when we talked about predictive coding and predictions. Predictions make their appearance not only with the feelings and sensations of the body, but through the narratives, these thoughts that show up to our conscious awareness. So that inner chatter is language. What we say out loud, what we then interpret and actually say out loud, that's language. But also the language that other people use around us also has an impact. Remember, our unconscious is always listening to who we think we are. And it can't always tell the difference between what we're saying about ourselves and what other people are saying around us. That's why we talk so much about association and how we surround ourselves with people. Who we surround ourselves influences who we become. So we have to understand that language does have that impact both on our own self-reporting language, but also the language that people use around us. But when it comes to the effectiveness of mental health approaches, in the early 2000s, I started asking myself with that one question that really every therapist asks. It's almost a cliche, is tell me a little bit about yourself. It struck me as odd. What do they expect to get? A complete description of the person, the truth behind who that person really is? It seemed kind of hard to imagine that even a skilled therapist would really get to the root of what was going on behind the scenes of somebody just by interviewing and asking some basic questions. It seemed like there was some type of, almost like a technology gap. There was some strategy or some approach that was missing. And that's what I started to realize that I needed to answer to, and really started my journey on cognitive response therapy on the research, because I realized that although the self-reported descriptions that somebody might give to a therapist doesn't necessarily reflect reality, it certainly must at least refer to what that person or who that person really is. So, but the language typically is very vague. It's inconsistent. It's self-protective. It sort of obfuscates a lot of the complexity of what's really going on. But I thought to myself, if we had the right approaches, the right strategy, the right tools, maybe we could leverage that language to get really at the heart of who that person is. So in other words, even though it refers to, we could figure out how to really reveal who that person is. And that's what drove the first research study. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but let's talk a little bit about the impact of language in general before we get into the details of how this impacted mental health approaches, specifically cognitive response therapy, and how I really feel like it's an integral part of the next evolution of mental health modalities through cognitive response therapy. Of course, head over to elliottbarnett.com if you want to check out the certification programs in cognitive response therapy and the RATE framework. All the research that I have had over the last 25 years is incorporated into those certification programs. So if you want to be an agent of change in the new era of mental health, that's where it starts. It starts by becoming certified in cognitive response therapy and the RATE framework. It doesn't matter if you're a mental health professional, a certified life coach, or if you're just somebody that really is inspired to help other people. We can empower you to become that agent of change in the new era of mental health. But let's talk a little bit about the power of language. I'm going to read quickly these two passages just to give you a flavor for how this really works. So here it goes. This has been an unusually hectic week, but I'm working through it. I think a lot of it has to do with my current workload at work. It has been a lot lately, but so far I'm doing well with it all. I'm confident I'm going to get through the project and it's going to get done on time. I do have some concerns about Jim, given the challenges I've had with him on projects in the past, but I'll work through it with him. I'm sure he wants to contribute and perform, but at times struggles to do so. I'll be open and honest with him and we will figure it out together. I got into a bit of an argument with Tammy the other day. She was late again. She seems to be late often, which can be frustrating because it takes time away from what we are doing, but she has a lot going on in her life. I should have handled the situation better. I'm going to call her and apologize for giving her a hard time. She's doing her best, and so am I. I've been dating Tina for a while now. I feel good when I'm around her, and I do my best to be at my best around her. But we are both learning about each other, so we will see where it goes. I'm hopeful and look forward to learning more about her and her about me. Okay. That's one passage. Let's listen to this one. This has been the hardest week of my life. Work has been grueling and it's not going to let up. I have to get the project done by next week, but I know Jim is just going to mess things up like he always does. I also lost it on Tammy. She was late again. She's always late and it's so disrespectful to my time. She always has an excuse, but I'm tired of it. I guess things aren't all that bad. I've been dating Tina for a while. She's the only good thing I have going on, and she makes me happy when I'm around her. In fact, that's the only time I'm happy, and when I'm talking with her or when I'm around her. I have no idea if she feels the same, but I hope so. Okay, so when you listen to those two passages, they're essentially describing the same situation, but dramatically differently, and you could feel the energy feeling. Actually, you could almost feel the stress. You probably felt a little bit of a stress response just by hearing me describe that way in the second scenario. In the first one, it was more uplifting. It was more taking responsibility. You can hear the same type of situation, but described differently, evokes very different responses to physical responses, actual feelings and sensations of the body, which, as we understand, through the predictive model, predictions are based on the state of the body. So if the state of the body shifts from something that's more positive to negative or from negative to positive, you're going to get different results. So the way that we articulate things, the way that we express things clearly has an impact on the state of our body. Therefore, it has an impact on the predictions. Therefore, it has an impact on how we show up and respond to life's situations. I can frame things and prime you to respond differently to different situations. You can be primed, which is more of an unconscious phenomenon, just by hearing something passively around you that might be negative. It kind of primes you to respond to a future situation, maybe a little bit more negatively. But I can also frame things differently actively. I can say things something like, I heard you're going to go meet Bob for that meeting. Oh, he's such a nice guy. I really like Bob. Or I could say, I heard you're going to go talk to Bob. Oh man, you really got to watch out for that guy. He's a really terrible guy. You're going to go meet Bob. Maybe you've never met Bob before, but you're going to be primed to respond differently based on the way I framed that description of Bob. So there's been studies about this. There was a study some time ago when participants were watching a automobile crash. Same video, but described differently. The first time they described it was, how fast do you think those cars were going when they bumped into each other? And then the second time they asked, how fast do you think those cars were going when they smashed into each other? And the variance was as much as 10 miles an hour difference just by watching the same video, but just by having it framed differently using language. The power of language. We have to appreciate and understand the impact that it has. So getting back to the research and the fact that this self-reported language, when somebody says, tell me a little bit about yourself, it is typically vague, inconsistent, doesn't really provide clarity to the therapist. And this is a very heavy lift for anybody in the coaching industry, or anybody that wants to affect change in somebody's life. They have to have at least a baseline to start with. They have to have some way of relying on how that person describes themselves in some meaningful way. If they're consistently obfuscating details or hiding things or making it difficult to kind of paint a complete picture, you're sort of almost playing a connect the dots game. They're giving you all these little dots to connect, and theoretically, if you connect it all together, you'd have a complete picture of their life as a starting point to help them on their mental health journey. But typically, that's not the case. So that's what I wanted to close the gap. I wanted to figure out, how do we leverage language to help them overcome what we refer to as the introspection illusion. That's the official term that is used for this cognitive bias, the fact that people don't genuinely know their own motivations or can't really describe themselves accurately. So we don't know ourselves very well. It's sort of, when somebody's asked a question, it's almost like a curated version of themselves that they almost want them to be like, or descriptions that other people have given them about themselves, but it doesn't really reflect their true self. So the question becomes, how do we get past this? How do we bypass or overcome the introspection illusion? So this was the original research study that I did that was around 2009 when that one officially kicked off, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. And this was all about recognizing that language, unstructured language, is chaotic. It doesn't really help you really identify who that person is underneath the covers. But if you could structure that language, it becomes a diagnostic tool. So what I created was the Language Association and Categorization System, or the LACS. This was what fell out of the original research study. What I realized is if we could categorize and find ways of associating the language that was self-reported by the research participants, we could help them overcome the introspection illusion. That's exactly what was demonstrated, but it was all through the power of language. But we didn't stop there. In the second research study, what we realized is, and what I thought to myself, well, if what's being reported doesn't really reflect who they are, there might actually be some stress involved in that. If you can't report who you are, you're probably trying to hide something about yourself in a way. It might not be, might not be consciously aware that you're doing that you're hiding something, but who we are, who we want others to see us as or perceive us or receive us as isn't necessarily who we truly are inside. And we talked about that in one of the previous episodes when I talked about personas and identities. We have these internal representations of who we are, And then we use those internal representations to portray identities. This, of course, is all rooted in the essence of who we are, our psychological structure, what we call in CRT, our mental core. The mental core represents an accumulation of all of our experiences. They are our beliefs, our values, our positive attributes, our not so positive attributes about who we are. We might be an empathetic person, we might be intelligent, compassionate, but we also might be prone to anger. We might believe in spending time with our family over making money, but we also might be triggered by jealous patterns and act out in anger at times. So there's all these different aspects of who we are that accumulate over time through our lived experiences. And that is what creates this mental core, this conceptualization of the essence of who we are. Kind of like our physical core is the center of our physical strength, stability, and balance. Our mental core is the center of our mental strength, stability, and balance. So these internal representations, our personas, are sort of putting together pieces of our mental core that allow us to portray certain identities to the world. So when we're describing ourselves through the language that shows up as somebody asks us about ourselves, we're representing ourselves maybe not so authentically. So the idea was that maybe the language that somebody provides could identify what I called core disharmonies, this inner dissonance, these disconnects between who the person really is inside and who they hope that somebody sees them as on the outside world. That's exactly what happened in the second research study, using the LACS and examining the language through those categories and the building these associations. Core disharmonies were revealed. Once the person identified and realized that those core disharmonies existed, we could work and help them resolve those. So that was what the research participants in the second study experienced, was overcoming these core disharmonies, a decrease in their stress response, because it's stressful to have that internal dissonance. These disconnects causes a stress response. And of course, we all know what the effect of stress has on the body, both our physical and mental health. Of course, those are inextricably tied. So it wasn't a surprise that it increased somebody's subjective well-being. Okay. But I did an episode, our last episode was on predictive coding. This really helped me pull it all together when I found the original research studies of Friston from 2009 and the follow-on studies that were from 2016 and so on, even the later studies of 2020 and so on around predictive coding. And very, very powerful research that showed that the brain is a prediction machine. It's always guessing as to what it thinks you need next in order to survive, not thrive, but survive. And the way that a prediction makes its appearance to your conscious awareness is, of course, through the sensations of the body, through those chemical releases in the body, but also through language, the thoughts that show up. They say, here's what I think you need to know as far as information so that you can make your next move in your life. You can make your next response to the situation that you're facing. So when I identified what I originally called in the third research study a response cycle, which the idea was that somebody responds to the world responds back, that feeds back into our lived experience, which then influences our next response. And these patterns of responses turn into habitual cycles, which really ends up kind of being our life. We live in these repetitive habitual cycles from one response to the next that clearly represented our opportunity to disrupt whatever negative patterns somebody was following in their life. And if they were not living their optimal life, we would want to disrupt those negative cycles and lead them towards positive ones so that they could live the life that they wanted to live. You can't choose the prediction itself, but you can influence the prediction by mindfully intervening in these cycles. But before I discovered predictive coding, I called these just response cycles. I didn't know that the neurological underpinning was this predictive model. But once I discovered that research of Friston and all this predictive coding, I realized that what I was articulating in that third study with response cycle was actually a predictive response cycle, meaning a prediction shows up from the unconscious based on the environment that you're in, memories, really your mental core, and the state of your body. So the chemical state, right? So obviously you're going to respond differently if you're hungry, you're tired, you're stressed out, you're happy, you're sad, you're glad. All these different states of the body are going to influence how you show up in life. And of course, your entire history, what's been accumulated in your mental core drives how you respond to situations. And of course, the environment. So the prediction shows up, makes its appearance through the sensations of the body, and then the thoughts, those narratives that show up, and then it drives your response to the situation. The world then responds back. You get some effect from how you responded that gets fed into the next prediction, and so on and so forth. So these predictive response cycles, again, still represented the opportunity to make true and lasting change in somebody's mental health. But how? Well, we already had the answer to that. We knew that the evolution of the mental health modalities that kept missing this incredible tool called language, we already built the asset that could be used. We had the language association and categorization system, the LACS. The person had already overcome the introspection illusion. They already knew themselves better than they did before. They resolved these core disharmonies, so their stress levels have increased, making them more emotionally available to make take their next steps in their mental health journey. They had an increase in subjective well-being, so they were well on their way to becoming the person that they wanted to become, to living their optimal life. This was truly the key unlock, moving the idea from response cycles to predictive response cycles, and recognizing that language had the power to do all four things that we needed to do, which is language refers to who the person is. So that first self-report at least is in the ballpark. Then you can use it to reveal who that person truly is. Then you use language to resolve these core disharmonies and increasing the subjective well-being. But then you can restructure the person's psychological structure, leveraging that same system, that same asset, the LACS. You mindfully intervene in those predictive response cycles, redirecting the responses so that you're feeding better information back into the predictive machine. This is the power of language. All of this is within the hands of those that leverage the technology that was invented very, very long time ago by our species and allows us to influence our unconscious mind. It's not just the one way. Of course, our unconscious is driving so much on our behalf, but we have to use our conscious awareness to start training and influencing the machine that is our unconscious to get better results in our life. And this truly is the future of mental health. This is the gap that I identified a couple decades ago now, that question of tell me a little bit about yourself, which has its place, but a mental health professional, a coach, anybody that wants to either help somebody improve their lives or help themselves to improve their lives needs to use the most incredible technology and the most amazing asset that we have, which is the language that we both self-report ourselves and the language around us, pulling it all together and allowing us to evolve our mental health in the right direction. This, I truly believe, is the next evolution for mental health approaches. This is why I'm so passionate about cognitive response therapy, because at the heart of cognitive response therapy, at the foundation of what makes that therapeutic modality so powerful, is the use of the most powerful technology that we have, which is language. So I really encourage you, head over to elliottbarnett.com, check out the certification programs, get involved in understanding the power of the language association and categorization system as built in to CRT, as well as it's built into the first couple phases of the ARATE framework. Once you understand how to leverage this technology and use it in a strategy to evolve either your clients' mental health or your own mental health, you will start to be able to identify how to live your optimal life. I believe in each one of you. I'll see you next time.